Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our April 19th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Zach Bader, and this episode is for those of you who are intrigued by what's going on beneath the surface out in your fields. Elyssa McFarland of the Soil Health Partnership, which is part of the National Corn Growers Association, is here, and she's going to share some ways to improve your soil health and how you're going to see that pay off over time. And since we're heading into farmers market season, we'll bring on Barb Ristau of the Iowa Farmers Market Association later in this episode to give us an outlook for Iowa's farmers markets in 2021. But let's start with Elyssa McFarland of the Soil Health Partnership. Spokesman editor Dirk Steimel takes it from here.
We're here with Elyssa McFarland of the Soil Health Partnership to discuss soil health and why it's such an important topic in ag today. Let's start with a little background on your organization, Elyssa. When was it formed? Which organizations are involved? And what's the organization's overall mission?
So the Soil Health Partnership is a program of the National Corn Growers Association. We've been around since 2014, and what we do is we work with farmers hand in hand to help understand soil on their farm. So we have on-farm research trials. We also are helping them share what they're learning on their farm with others, both kind of in their neighborhood, as well as policy folks and folks that are, involved in the industry up and down the supply chain. So we kind of help understand the soil and also disseminate that information to other folks who are interested.
And what's your role in the organization?
So I am the field development director, and so I kind of wear two hats. My first one is that I oversee the field team, and so I work with our field managers that we have throughout the countryside, where we are helping farmers, as I said, to measure soil health and their management strategies on their farm. And so those field managers are doing cover crop research trials, tillage research trials, and nutrient management research trials with farmers on their farm. So I kind of help oversee that work and coordinate that with our other departments that work on science and operations and those sort of things. And then I also work on regional development projects. So, for example, partnering with Iowa Corn or maybe a local co-op or something that's interested in engaging in our work. So I work on those regional and local partnerships as well.
As a farmer yourself down in southeast Iowa, why do you believe improving soil health is so important for Iowa farmers?
So our farm down in southeast Iowa has a range of different soils on it. And I think that that's something that I kind of intuitively learned as a kid. We'd be down on the bottoms working on irrigation, and I'd be playing in the sand while Dad was fixing an irrigator. And then we'd be, having to work on tile up and the uplands, and then we had some terraces where we'd graze cattle in the winter on some rolling hills. And I just always noticed that we were doing something different on every part of the farm all the time. And I think that's part of the reason why I loved working with Dad on the farm growing up, is there was always something different to do. And so that kind of evolved over time, and I was able to kind of get involved in soil science through a couple of different avenues. And I started to really understand some of the other things about soil. When I was in college, kind of the two options that really were out there career-wise, where you could, write fertilizer prescriptions for an ag retailer, or you could work for NRCS and write conservation plans for more of that kind of structural stuff, like terraces and that kind of stuff. And from my perspective, we integrated soil decision making throughout our operation all the time. When we were grazing, how much we were grazing, how we were managing water and nutrients across all of these different things. And so I think that understanding soil more deeply is an important component for all farmers, because we're all trying to optimize the system, and understanding more about your soil is the foundation of what we do in terms of especially row crop agriculture in Iowa. We're raising corn and soybeans, and we want to keep those corn and soybean plants as happy as much as possible, and that's having a good root system and access to those nutrients that we're putting out there.
What are the most compelling reasons for farmers to invest in their soil?
Well, I always say that with soil health, one of the concepts that I think about is there something that is yield limiting on your farm that you can't put into a box and spread or breed into a plant. And most of the time, those things are related to the air and water in your soil. Either it's too dry or it's too wet, you've got compaction issues. All of those sort of things are related to soil health and soil quality. And that's why it's important to be considering those things when you're out there making management decisions, because there's only so much we can do with, fertilizer placement or hybrids and those sort of things. At the end of the day, the soil also has to function as a structure in and of itself. The roots have to have room to move around. We have to make sure that that soil stays in place so that we can farm it again next year. And I think those are some of the things that make it really important for farmers to consider those aspects of their soil. And I think for the most part, a lot of folks are. And I think that's why soil health has become something that's so intuitive for folks, is they understand that compacted areas of their fields are problematic. They understand that erosion is problematic, and it's just figuring out the best way to address that on your farm and evolve your system over time.
Talk to us about some of the easier but really impactful things that farmers can do to improve the health of their soil.
So, as I have worked in Iowa for a bit and seen different farmers working on different aspects of their soil, the first and foremost thing that I think about is disturbance. So, reducing the number of times you're out there disturbing your soil. So that can look like no-till, strip-till, going from, 4 passes of tillage down to 3. And then also making sure that if you are doing some soil disturbance, that you're doing it at a time of year and in field conditions, that it makes sense to be doing that. And so being really mindful of when it's too wet. One of the things that I think about is if you're treating tillage as a way to prepare the seedbed, then you need to be thinking about it and analyzing it just as deeply as you do field conditions when you're planting. You wouldn't go out there and mud in the crop unless you absolutely had to. So you shouldn't be out there, mudding up your tillage unless you absolutely have to. And so that reduction in disturbance and making sure you're checking field conditions just as if you would if you're planting, I think is a really simple place to start and something that's accessible for most folks. Obviously, the added benefits that you get when you stack on some of the other management decisions that you can choose, cover crops, those sort of things, can really help amplify the effects of, if you are reducing your disturbance, then you're going to have the soil hold together better already. And then if you add on top of that, growing, cover crops when you're not growing your cash crops, then that also helps stabilize the soil even more. And so that kind of added benefit, once you start to stack the practices together, I think is where you really see advancements in your soil structure and are able to have more days where your corn and soybean roots are happier because they have more soil to explore. And you also have more days where you can be out there. You have better soil structure, so you can have more days where you're getting the rain soaked into the ground, and you can maybe get out there a day sooner after a rain to go out there and plant.
Tell us about some of the longer term actions that farmers can take to improve their soil.
Obviously, integration with livestock is something that a lot of folks talk about as a way to improve soils, because you get that feedback loop of that really rich manure. But I know that that's something that's more of like entire operation change. That's not just looking at tweaking your cropping system. That's adding an entire enterprise to your operation. And sometimes that's not really feasible if you don't have a market in your area to be able to sell that livestock. I feel like in Iowa, we're pretty fortunate in that we have that most places, but that's something that I think that integration with livestock is something that I think takes a little bit longer to see the benefits to the soil. And it also maybe takes a little bit more to get it integrated into your operation and see the benefits from a profit perspective. I know that it can be a pretty big bite of capital to put up that extra barn or that holding facility for manure.
Certainly, soil health is something that improves gradually over time when farmers take these actions. What do you see when your soil health is improving?
One of the first things that I feel like we notice as you start to see improvements in soil health is just looking at the surface of the soil. You don't have to even stick a probe in the ground. Obviously, I love taking a shovel out there and looking at the soil directly and kind of digging around. But if you look at the surface as you're out there checking conditions in a field, you can see that residue breaks down more quickly when you have more microbial activity in your soil. So you'll start to see residue break down more quickly. And you'll also start to see the water infiltrating into the soil better. So you'll see less ponding on the surface. That's a good indication. If you see areas of your field or maybe, a neighbor's field or something where there's more ponding and you've taken some steps to try to increase your soil health, you'll typically see less ponding of water as that water is able to get into the soil profile. Another thing, kind of on the flip side of that water equation, would be when you start to run into a water limiting situation, as we've had like last summer in Western Iowa. If you can take a shovel out there and kind of dig around, you'll notice that you'll still have water closer to the surface of the soil, and you'll retain that water Soil temperature is another thing that can be impacted by soil health. So as you start to see your soils becoming healthier, you'll start to see less flashiness in your soil temperature. So when it's better covered and has a more consistent air and water exchange, you'll see that kind of flashiness of the temperature come down. So it won't spike up as high in the summertime when you get that like beating heat of the July and August sun. And then you'll also see when it warms up in the spring, it doesn't drop back down and flash back up as much. So it can take, I've heard, a little bit longer, and I've seen that too as well, to get soils warming up, but then they tend to be more consistent.
Many farmers rent land from landlords, and what are the strategies that they can use to help their landlords understand and appreciate the importance of building soil health?
So I rent land from a few different folks, and so does my family. And I've had a conversation with a lot of different farmers out there, and it seems to be, from my perspective, that there's a whole range of different landowners out there, as well as there are farmers that are interested in this. So some of our landlords are really excited and want to, see as much soil conservation practices out there and as visible as way possible. They want to see that green cover crop field. And I think that's probably the easier conversation to have. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult for those landowners that may not understand soils as deeply, or may have some preconceived notions about like clean tilled fields and that sort of thing. And I think that being able to talk through your experiences as a farmer and why you feel it's important, sharing, the importance that you see of, maybe water quality, or the importance you see of maintaining that resource that they own, sharing with them, I want to take care of your land. I want to make sure that the soil stays in place. So that's why I'm choosing these management strategies, because I'm wanting to help you care for your investment. Obviously, different folks are motivated by different things. And so for those folks who are very data motivated, there's a lot of great information out there in terms of how much soil erosion savings you have by reducing tillage or cover crops. There's a lot of great resources from NRCS and other partners on that. And the other thing that I would say, in my experience working with some of the partnerships that we have on the soil health partnership side, is that research so far has demonstrated that landowners are most interested in hearing about these sort of concepts directly from the farmers that rent their land. They're really trusted business partner, and that's who they're looking for to help advise them on how to best take care of their land. So don't be too humble in your assessment of your ability to weigh in on this topic. I think that farmers are really knowledgeable, and while you may not have the fanciest soil science terms, you have a lot of years of experience, and farmers know their land the best. And I think that that's something that you shouldn't hesitate to share with any part of your business partners, your bankers, your agronomists, your landlords, anybody that you do business with.
So it's really good to start the conversation.
Yes, definitely good to start the conversation, and start the conversation with your own experience. If you see something different going on that farm, stop by and say something. Give them a call. Send them people are getting more tech savvy. Take a picture and text it to them and say, "Look, we're out here planting a day earlier after this rain because we were able to absorb that water," or it's out here raining right now and we aren't losing soil. Nothing's eroding. So those kind of things are good things to share. And like I said, it doesn't have to be overly technical.
There's really so much to learn when it comes to soil health, and we appreciate Elyssa coming on the podcast to share just a few of her insights with us. And if you're interested in digging deeper, you can check out the Soil Health Partnership's website, which is soilhealthpartnership.org. Of course, there's nothing like planting season to crank up the level of excitement and anticipation on the farm. And as we head into farmers market season, there's definitely a level of excitement in the Iowa communities that host those markets as well. Did you know that Iowa has roughly 175 farmers markets? And according to the Iowa Department of Ag, if you look back to 2019, Iowa's farmers markets were generating roughly $39 million in sales. Of course, the pandemic took its toll on the farmers markets in 2020, but they are bouncing back in 2021. So to discuss the value that farmers markets bring to our communities, we're bringing on a farmers market veteran, Barb Ristau. Barb's been involved in promoting farmers markets since the early 1980s, and she's currently wearing a number of hats as the program assistant for ISU Extension in Franklin County, and as a board member of the Iowa Farmers Market Association, and also serving on the board for her local farmers market in the city of Hampton. So, with that, here's Iowa Farm Bureau's Caitlin Lamb with Barb Ristau.
Barb, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved with the Iowa Farmers Market Association?
I started our local farmers market back in 1982. It was part of my job description at the time. I was originally hired by Franklin County with a grant from Iowa State for food preservation. And part of the food preservation was encouraging people to grow their own food and also buy their own food at farmers markets. I have stayed on the board since we incorporated the Iowa Farmers Market Association. It was started back in, I think it was 2001, with the help of Iowa Department of Ag because, well, basically, I think they needed some help with farmers markets in the state. Basically, our intent is to do a meeting once a year for helping train market managers and vendors on some of the best practices for running a farmer's market and also for just simply encouraging customers to come visit the farmer's market too.
And so starting that process back in, did you say 1982?
Yeah.
So you've seen farmers markets really evolve then, and you see how widely popular they are in Iowa, celebrating local foods, the people who grow them, and they also provide a sense of community. So with your experience training vendors and helping with best practices, can you tell us more about the impact of farmers markets in terms of economics or rural vitality?
Well, I kept numbers from our vendors for quite a few years because it kind of helped us determine how our market was doing. And the last year that I kept numbers, the vendors turned into me a total of around $30,000 that they made here in a small community. And for a small community, it doesn't sound like much when you're talking big communities, but for small communities, that's a pretty good sized amount of money just made at farmers markets 2 times a week over the summer. And our vendors have been very happy with what they have been able to make, and they've been very happy developing their customer base. The customers have been happy. We have a lot of customers that ask for specific vendors. And of course, I've seen vendors come and go over that amount of time. We've added one group to our market, and that is some 4-H kids. We have offered them a 4-time freebie where they don't have to pay any fees or anything to come sell their product and try it out and see how they like it. And that has encouraged, we have one young man that is now going to sell again this summer. And I'm hoping he's on our board. He's actually joined our board. So I think he's also interested in becoming a full-time vendor. 4-H is a really good organization to promote vendors for farmers market because it's something they can do as a club project. It's something they can do as an individual project. It's something they can try. And if they don't like it, they aren't committed to staying because only 4 times they can come for 4 times for free. So that kind of gives them a chance to see if they're interested in it and if the customers are interested in them.
Yeah, I bet that's really neat to see. And 4-H would be a good organization to get involved. I remember one time being at a county fair and watching a young man give a presentation for his project. And he was talking about his sweet corn business. And he had to, know all the things about growing his crop and all the record keeping behind it and then marketing. So there's a whole lot that goes into that would be really useful for kids to learn.
Yes, it is.
And I know being home last spring with my toddler, we were able to attend our local farmers market in Perry. And it was just a good reason to get out of the house for us, for sure. And I know he had fun picking out his own food item to bring home, but obviously the event looked different, masks and social distancing. Every vendor had hand sanitizer at their booth, and looking ahead to this year's farmers market season, is there specific guidance that the Farmers Market Association is giving to communities and vendors? Will we see more of a back to normal feel, or are there certain protocols being suggested even still in 2021?
I think we're still suggesting that maybe they try to social distance and wear masks where possible. Hopefully, it's a little bit more back to normal situation that we can encourage. But I think people are wanting to be cautious, especially in the beginning, until we know if numbers are really going down and how many people are getting vaccinated. I think the vaccination is a big thing. If people get vaccinated and feel like they're protected, that's going to help too.
Absolutely. And I, for one, am looking forward to trying to get out to more this year. People assume that because I live on an acreage and my husband farms, that I have a garden or chickens or something. But one year I felt ambitious and tried my hand at container gardening, and it yielded very poorly. So I'm just happy supporting people who already have the knowledge and green thumb. But I know that there are some who are listening to this podcast episode who may have actually bounced around the idea of becoming a farmers market vendor. So what are the first steps you'd recommend someone who has this interest to do? Are there certain requirements they need to abide by? You talked about training and classes. Can you talk more about those first steps and considerations?
I think one of the first steps, depending on what season they're thinking about this, could be to go visit a farmer's market and talk to some of the vendors and see what products are needed at that market, what things they need to do to get involved. One of the things especially that I see we have occasionally people show up expecting to be a vendor without ever calling ahead or checking local rules, local guidance, anything. They just show up. So I think the first step is find out what the local rules and regulations are and what kinds of things you might have to do ahead before you just show up. And also, as far as product, growing fruits and vegetables, that has to be decided way early because it's almost too late now for people to start growing fruits and vegetables for sale because they need to have done some of their homework a couple months ago.
I'm sure that from, county, is it county to county, the rules and regulations are different, or can it even be city to city?
It can even be city to city, depending on who's in charge, who's running it, who's set it up.
And going back to when you first talked about the different trainings for vendors and best practices, where can people find more information about that?
I would say your local extension service is a possibility. Iowa State is now promoting local foods, and they are really behind local foods. So there are more extension offices that are also offering things for vendors and for promoting local foods and that type of thing.
In your observation, what qualities do you see successful farmers market vendors have? What are they doing that puts them above the rest? You mentioned some vendors who have been around for a long time and they have a really large and loyal client base. What are they doing?
Well, number one, they're friendly. Number two, they try to provide product that the customers want. So if customers are looking for something, the successful vendor will open his ears and maybe try to add that product to his list if there are enough people looking for it. They also have product that looks good. You don't have to have all kinds of flowery arrangements around your product, but you do need to have things looking clean. You do need to have things well arranged and easy to see and also easy to reach. And you yourself need to be presentable. You need to present a clean picture to the customer.
Well, Barb, thank you so much for your time today. I think our listeners gained some valuable insight into this direct-to-consumer sector of agriculture, and I hope you have a great farmers market season.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I don't think many people realize just how many farmers markets we have here in Iowa and all that they contribute to their local communities. Of course, those of us living in the Des Moines area are familiar with the successful downtown farmers market, but the impact of these markets around the state is significant, and as Barb would tell you, it's been that way for years. Here at Iowa Farm Bureau, we are proud to support farmers markets around the state, and here's something else you might not realize. Every year, for the past 15 years, Iowa Farm Bureau has supplied the bags that farmers market vendors use to serve their customers. That's roughly 1 million bags per year, and we're happy to do it again in 2021. Okay, we are nearing the end of this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast, but before you go, I want to remind you of an important deadline that's coming up. May 1st is the deadline to submit your nomination for Iowa's 2021 Conservation Farmer of the Year Award. So if you've got a neighbor with a proven track record of soil conservation and water quality protection, be sure to nominate that farmer right now. We've actually given you a link in the notes for this podcast episode, so check that out to submit your nomination before May 1st. And with that, we've reached the end of our episode. I hope that you picked up something useful from today's interviews and that you will join us for our next regularly scheduled episode on May 3rd. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything that we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.